off with something that I felt was the most important thing to cover out of the gate this morning, and it is the brain. There have been incredible developments in the field of neuroscience this past year and even years before. And our keynote speaker is a real pioneer in how technology can aid in helping improve our brain's function. Let's welcome Dr. Adam Gazzelli, the founder and executive director of Neuroscape, to the stage.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. It's exciting to be here today. It's kick off this amazing couple days that we're going to share. I'm pretty excited to be at CES. It's my first time. I spent the hours yesterday walking the floor and looking at all the amazing technology, and it's mind-blowing. You know, from the VR and AR, of course, but the 3D printing, the drones. A robot made me coffee yesterday, I have to say. It was excellent coffee. And, you know, I'm as excited, I think, as everyone about the future that we will live in. But I have to say, I had this repetitive thought that technology can be doing more for us right now. You see, I feel like we're in the midst of a crisis. And it's a crisis that we don't always talk about, but it's a cognition crisis. And I think the signs of it exist every time you look at the news. This is not a crisis of information, but rather the core of what makes us human. How we perceive, how we think, feel, make decisions, and then how we act. And this is a big crisis. I'd put it right up there with things like climate change. Because if we can't think at a higher level, and we can't have decision-making that is time delayed and about people other than ourselves, then all the information in the world will not make us and allow us to address something like climate change. And I'd say that this crisis raises a challenge, a grand challenge, to enhance cognition. This is a pervasive and global one. You could see it across every domain. So from improving cognition in young people, that should be the purview of what we would think of as education. For all of us throughout our lives, maintaining our mental abilities, it would be wellness. And then, of course, if we have deficits in how we think or feel or process information, it would fall in the domain of medicine, mental health. There are other fields where we've been literally obsessed with optimizing our abilities, like the world of physical fitness. So strength, endurance, power, speed, flexibility, coordination, balance. There exist specialized technologies to optimize all these abilities, right? And programs and practitioners as well. How are we doing for optimizing these abilities of cognition? Our attention, our perception, our memory, our emotional regulation, decision-making, and at the highest levels, things like empathy, compassion, wisdom, love. I'd say that we are tragically lacking in those domains. And really that falls across 5 areas right now, both for healthy and impaired. And I'm going to run a parallel story between them. The first problem is that we have very poor assessments. We don't really know how people's brains are functioning. If they have a mental challenge, let's say it's attention or emotional regulation, and go to the doctor, a physician, either a general practitioner or even a psychiatrist, we don't really know what's actually going on inside that person's brain that brings them in there, right? We don't bring all the amazing technologies that we use in the world of cognitive neuroscience to look at functional brain activity and understand that individual. When it comes to education, it's even worse. We only look at the cognition of a young person if we think they have a learning disability. If not, we have no idea how their brains are functioning, how their memory is performing, how they're directing and sustaining their attention, how they're regulating their emotions. But that doesn't prevent us from trying to improve cognition. In the world of medicine, where I come from, I'm a neurologist, we tend to rely almost completely upon small molecules, pharmaceuticals. Now, there's nothing inherently wrong with the concept of using a small molecule to improve our cognition. But we've been trying to do this for 60 years, and we do not have one major win. And the problem is that it's poorly targeted. They, in general, act on neurotransmitter systems, but not the underlying computational unit of the brain, the neural network. And therefore, we always have to increase our doses to very high levels to get the effects we want, and then we get just as many side effects as effects. In the school system, we've really relied on this system of didactic education that grew out of the Industrial Revolution. But we do not target the processing abilities that transferring information content relies upon. The other main problem is that these are both incredibly non-personalized systems. As physicians, we make our prescriptive advice on large population data that completely ignore all the individual differences of the brains in those studies. And the school system around the world has had a long-standing problem with the curriculum. How do you target it? Do you leave kids behind? Do you separate classes? Still has never really been fully addressed in an appropriate way. There are also some practitioners, not all, will treat each of these approaches in a silo, as if we have something that can correct the complexities of depression with a single modality. But perhaps the biggest problem is that they're both open-loop systems. They have long, sloppy, non-quantitative cycles between how we intervene to improve brain function and then how we adjust that based upon what's actually happening. So you could take a pill, you could go home. Months can pass where you subjectively monitor your effects and side effects, go back to your doctor, and then a sort of decision is reached to go up or down 5 milligrams, right? This is the art of medicine. And I'd say it's just not good enough. Same thing in the classroom. Your performance, a child's performance on a test doesn't update their learning of that material. Maybe it places them in the next class as an abstract influence on them, but certainly not a direct closed-loop influence. And so this is sort of the main message that I want to share with you, is that we need other tools that are targeted, personalized, multimodal, and closed loop, and coupled with better assessments if we are going to improve the function of something as complex as the human brain. How do we do that? Well, one option, and why I know we are all here today, is because of technology, right? The technology should hold that promise. I would be irresponsible if I didn't pause at this point and say that I think technology, as wonderful as it is, has challenged our brains in many fundamental ways. I actually wrote a book on it, Distracted Mind, Ancient Brain in a High-Tech World, last year. I'm not going to talk about this at all today, but it's basically an evolutionary perspective on how our brains' evolutionary development has given us a lot of strengths, but also weaknesses, and how technology has challenged that. A good friend of mine, Jon Favreau, he's an actor, writer, producer in Hollywood. We did a talk on a stage fireside chat on virtual reality and storytelling. And he says, I want to find the humanity in the technology. And I think this is such a critical point, and probably what brings everyone in this room today, is that I view this as a pivot point in the history of technology, that we'll look back at around this time that we started thinking responsibly from the very beginning of when we build technologies, whether or not it's going to enhance what makes us human or degrade us. And it's a critical time to have that conversation. As you all know, we now have consumer-available virtual reality, augmented reality, motion capture, wearable physiological devices, machine learning, and other AI algorithms. These will have a profound effect upon our brains and minds, whether we want them to or not. How can we think about these technologies in a way that they can improve our brain function as opposed to degrade it? The simple answer is that they can create powerful experiences. That is what they do at their very nature. But experiences are really the gateway to our brain's plasticity. This is a tremendous opportunity. We change, modify our brain at every level, structure, chemistry, function, driven by experience. Right? This is the entire basis of learning. We know well how strong this relationship is. You can have a single tragic experience that detrimentally impacts the function of your brain for the rest of your life. Right? We call that PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. If it has that power, then if we think about creating technologies or even leveraging existing technologies to build powerful experiences that are designed to maximally harness the brain's plasticity, then we should be able to enhance our cognition, refine our behaviors, and ultimately to elevate our minds. I'm going to make this a little less abstract and tell you about my first foray into this world by thinking about how to build closed-loop systems to accomplish that. So not all experiences are created equal, not all foods are equal, not all drugs are equal. I would say the most powerful experience to change anything about our physiology, including our brains, is the closed-loop system. Just to be explicit, a closed-loop system is where you intervene in some way. You record the impact with as low latency as possible. You then use that data to refine your intervention based upon what you found, and then you apply it again. Record, refine, apply, cycling over and over again, at each pass becoming more and more focused on changing your outcome. Every engineer knows that this feedback system is how you change anything. It's used in the physical world. It's how we monitor whether the drill bits are exerting too much pressure so that they don't fracture. But it has not been used in biological systems as much as it should be. One really exciting opportunity for technology in closed-loop systems is what we latched onto in the early days, which is through video games. So this is how a closed-loop video game system could work. you're playing a game, and of course it's your brain playing the game, directing your body. While you are behaving and interacting, there are performance metrics being generated all the time. On the surface, the most obvious ones are how fast you are and how accurate you are, but there are other more complex ones. This data can be collected by an algorithm, a game engine, that's recording that essentially in real time, very low latency, and then feeding back in the closed loop an updated environment based on your data. There's two ways we can update that environment. We can regulate the challenge appropriate to your ability so that you're right in that sweet spot, that flow state, where it's not so hard that it's frustrating, not so easy that it's boring. We think this, to harness plasticity, this is the critical state that you need to be in. We also could give feedback and reward in real time. And every game designer knows that this is how you create that deep immersion in the moment in gameplay. This closed loop is another opportunity to bring in all the technologies that you see here at CES. So for example, motion capture and physiological recordings can help this algorithm understand you in the moment in a much deeper way by feeding that information into the game engine. And then through more immersive experiential technologies like augmented and virtual reality, you can create a much more real-world experience to further drive this. There's also great opportunity for machine learning, algorithms, to integrate this. And so what you wind up with here is a multimodal closed-loop system. And we don't have this now, not in this full complexity, but I believe that this is the future about how technologies will allow us to address this cognition crisis and enhance our cognitive abilities. When I'm asked to speak about AI, this is what I think about. This would be an AI that advances HI, right? Using this system to drive our own human intelligence to the next level. So let me put this in a more real-world scenario and tell you how it began for me. So in 2008, I'd been studying neuroscience for 15 years at that time, and I became frustrated with just reporting the bad news, that as we get older, our cognitive control abilities, our attention, our working memory, our goal management, multitasking, and task switching degrade, independent of things like Alzheimer's disease and other causes of dementia. And so I thought, could we build a closed-loop video game based on the premise that I shared with you to help improve these abilities in older adults? And the hypothesis was that because all of these abilities, while distinct, are related to each other through common neural networks, and our lab and many others have shown that, and they all degrade with aging, if we put enough pressure on one of them, in this case multitasking, a goal management ability, could we lead to benefits in other abilities that are related but not identical? And so in order to do that, we built our first closed-loop video game called Neuro Racer. I actually built this along with friends at LucasArts. I think Matt Omernick is in the audience, who was actually one of our lead designers and developers on this. It took us around a year to build it, and then do a 3-year study. And I just want to give you a quick look at this. It was our first game, and maybe sort of simple, sort of pole position type game on its surface. What's more interesting is what's under the hood. So what's going on here are players playing the game, trying to maintain their car on the road by moving a joystick, and then they're responding as rapidly and accurately to target signs, like the green circle, but not green pentagons. And what's happening here is that there's two independent closed-loop algorithms that are adjusting the difficulty of each of those tasks based upon performance metrics that are being gathered. But if you played Neuro Racer, whether or not you're aware of it, you would trade off between these tasks. What we wanted to do is have people perform them both at a very high level because we thought that's what would lead to the transfer to these other abilities. So what we discovered is that we could simply couple and tether across these two tasks with a reward cycle. So in other words, you do not level up in Neuro Racer unless you get better at both tasks after a 3-minute run. And something we learned is that everyone, including 80-year-olds, want to level up in video games. It's just a core aspect of being human. And so that's how we weave together challenge, adaptivity, and feedback. This was our first foray into that. And then we did a very long multiple study to see what its effects are. The first thing we looked at is, could we use this video game as an assessment tool to understand this ability to multitask and how it changes across the lifespan? So on the x-axis, you're looking at from 20-year-olds all the way up to 80-year-olds. And the y-axis is how they multitask on Neuro Racer. So a 0, where the red line is, that means that you perform the sign task as well when you do it alone compared to when you're driving at the same time. And then that's the decrement in performance you suffer when you multitask. 20-year-olds. At least the 20-year-olds in San Francisco that were in our study believe they are multitasking masters, right? They are practicing it all day long. but yet we find they have a 27% decrement in their ability when they engage in these two tasks. Of note, no one in this study was a video game player. We wanted to equate that across all the age groups. So we found that only 30 non-video game players in San Francisco and locked them up in the lab for months. We next asked the question, how does this ability to multitask, even though it's not perfect, maintain across the lifespan? Do you maintain it at a high level and then only to have it just plummet in one tragic day when you're 69 years old? Or does it plummet every tragic day of your life? And that's what we find. We find that this ability declines linearly. It's not the only cognitive ability that has this pattern. Processing speed in general, resistance of distraction, working memory also shows this trend. So it doesn't preserve your whole life. It actually peaks after these critical stages of development. You have just I don't know if anyone here is 23 years old. That's where I'm guessing sort of the peak of the pyramid is. And enjoy every day of this year, because you could see it's a slippery slope after that. All right, that's the bad news. We also wanted to see, could we use this video game as a neural diagnostic tool? And so we recorded 64-channel wired EEG during gameplay and looked at a metric called midline frontal theta. Midline frontal theta is a low burst of activity, low frequency activity that occurs right at the most challenging part in a cognitive control task across all of those different abilities. And what you're looking at here is a topographic plot of a 20-year-old. The nose is pointing up, the ears are to the side, and you could see that yellow burst right in the front. And you could see it's 3/4 of the way up the power spectrum. This occurs a third of a second after a sign comes up while you're driving. So you're driving, trying to maintain your position, the sign comes up, it's a very demanding moment, and you have this burst that by 800 milliseconds is back down to baseline. If you are a 60 or 70-year-old, this is what we find. So there's a burst there. It's not blue, but it's certainly not at the same level. And this replicates what we found with other research, including functional MRI, that why older adults do not engage in cognitive control activities to the same degree is because of a decrease in efficiency, robustness of activation of the prefrontal cortex and its network with the rest of the brain. Then we shifted into the third stage of the study. Could we use this video game, closed-loop video game, as a training tool to actually improve these abilities? And so we had a group of older adults play a month, 1 hour a day, 3 days a week for 12 weeks, for 4 weeks, so 12 hours of gameplay. So 12 hours of gameplay across a month. They played at home, then they came back into the lab to see what happened. And this is what we find. So an impressive improvement in their ability to multitask on the game. As a neuroscientist, even more exciting to us is the increase in prefrontal cortical activity that you're seeing there, that red dot right in the front of the brain. And not just the isolated activity, but the network with the rest of the brain. Interestingly enough, 6 months later, after we pull this laptop out of their clutching hands, we find that this activity, this performance is actually preserved. It doesn't decline back down to baseline, which we actually did not hypothesize. What was most exciting about this study is that we confirmed our initial hypothesis. We were able to improve 2 other tasks, very different, that were tested before and after, working memory and an attention span, looking at vigilance, sustaining attention. We also had 2 control groups. One, a no-contact control, showing that there's no practice effects in just doing this before and after. And we also had another group that played a non-multitasking version of Neuro Racer. You do the drive test, you do the sign test, but you never do them at the same time. They showed no improvement in their ability to multitask on the game and no transfer to these other abilities. So we're learning that the active ingredient in Neuro Racer was this interference processing challenge, letting us to publish this at the end of 2013 in this journal, Nature, which is, for a scientist as good as it gets, was on the cover of the journal. But it's really challenged me over the years to message that if there is a game changer here, it's really the methodology, that a group of scientists could work, listen, respect professionals in another industry, like the video game world, to build something that neither group could create alone, and then do a careful, well-controlled study with neural measures as outcomes to understand mechanism. If we do not start engaging in this, so despite the fact that it's expensive and takes a long time, we'll never move technologies from the consumer domain into health and education. So hopefully we see more of that, despite the fact that it is challenging to do. Where do we go with this? My goals here were not to have this just end as an academic exercise, even one as exciting as it concluded, but rather turn this into a real-world product to help people directly. And so I helped co-found this company with Matt and a group called Pure Tech Ventures. Eddie Martucci was our lead in Boston. And Achille is a company that is now devoted to trying to see if they can take technologies like that one that I just described to you. So I filed a patent on the methodology behind Neuro Racer. After 6 years, that patent was just approved a couple months ago. It takes a long time to get software patents these days. And then turn that into a product. Interestingly enough, Achille has made a decision to not make this a pure consumer product, but take it through the medical device pathway and see if it could reach the highest level of regulatory approval. So here's a new game, Project Evo. Matt is here. Actually, at 10 o'clock, he'll be speaking and talking much more about the game and how, as a game developer, a team of game developers and designers and artists, you go about building a game with this intention in mind, a closed-loop game to improve cognition. What's going on now is that we're advancing this to see if it can become an approved diagnostic and therapeutic tool. We have multiple studies underway. Some of them are diagnostic, like our ones in Alzheimer's disease. All these studies are ongoing. I'm not on any of these. It's more important for me at this point to pass it off to my colleagues and let other people validate it at this level. But I think the one that's generated the most excitement is that we just completed a phase 3 FDA approval trial for the treatment of pediatric ADHD. That trial was completed in November. We read out the results in December, and I'm actually pleased to report that we hit our primary outcome on that. It's a well-controlled, randomized controlled trial, multiple sites. We now, over the course of this year, advance to FDA submission. And hopefully, we'll see, maybe even in 2018, that we're looking at the first non-drug treatment for pediatric ADHD, the first digital medicine of this category, and of course the first prescribable video game of any kind. So it's a very exciting year for us. It's been a long road, but this is just the beginning, right? As we pass through this, over these hurdles, looking if this will be reimbursed, will doctors prescribe, will families use, and our market research suggests it, but we still have a lot of work to do, then we move to other solutions for depression, anxiety, Alzheimer's disease, and many others that are now being researched. So while that's going on, back in the lab, everything changed. No one in our group wanted to do just basic science anymore. They wanted to do translational science, translational neuroscience, where the goal is to see, can we actually help people? And so at UCSF, we converted my lab into a center called Neuroscape, where our goal is to bridge this gap between technology and neuroscience. I don't have time to share with you all the things that we've been doing over the last several years. I just want to tell you that one of our big goals is to continue to develop these closed-loop video games, targeting different aspects of cognition. So body-brain trainer, engage, rhythmicity, virtual attention, labyrinth, metatrain. All of these games have taken at least 2 years to develop. They all target different cognitive control abilities, some basic memory. And they all use different platforms, motion capture, physiological devices, a lot of virtual reality, to see, can we bring the best of what technology has to offer us right now into this domain. We are really excited. We have 5 longitudinal trials at Neuroscape right now to looking at the benefits that these have, but we don't think the biggest win is even going to happen in the next 4 or 5 years, more over the next decade, as we start looking at how these games interact with each other, something we call neuro CrossFit training. Right, so we don't believe that we should step in that same path that we saw the pharmaceutical industry progressing, where we build silos around every single treatment. We now do the deepest dive we could possibly do into figuring out how these games change someone before and after. So structural MRI, functional MRI, EEG, stress testing, cognitive testing, mood evaluation. We do blood work looking at hormone levels and telomere length, inflammatory markers. If we think it could change, we record it to understand how we might have a signal here that we've built something that can have a positive, meaningful, and enduring impact. Then we advance it out to the world of industry, where we can see if we can take it to the next level, as we've done with Achille, and bring it to people's lives directly. Just to conclude, this is really also only the beginning. While we love video games because they activate neural networks more selectively than anything we ever had before, it's just the beginning, right? We can then use other tools of neuroscience to take this to the next level, to enhance it further. One technology that we've been working on with many partners is called the glass brain. What you're looking at here is my glass brain. It is an MRI image. You can see the cortex in blue and the fibers, the axons that connect different brain areas in gold. And then overlaid on top of it is real-time EEG activity, just with a 200 millisecond delay. Each of these colors representing a different frequency, multivariate Granger causality showing at how brain areas interact over time. This is still in the proof of concept phase, but where we're going with this is the goal of recording what's going on with the brain with as high a resolution as possible in real time, so that our games are not just responsive to how you're performing, your reaction time and your accuracy, not just responding to your heart rate and your galvanic skin responses, all of which are important, but to what's going on in your brain. We think this will be like a gamma knife, a surgical approach to directing the algorithms, the rewards, the challenge adaptivity to those parts, those processing abilities of your brain that most need it. And so that's a study that we're doing right now. We're also interested in using this data to guide the stimulation parameters of transcranial alternating current stimulation. So we had a paper earlier this year that showed that if you play a video game for an hour, you being a 20-year-old, we can accelerate your learning curve over that time. And so now we'll see, can we lead to better transfer effects? So over the next 10 years, we'll look to see how these type of technologies could have benefits across all of these different conditions, and then even address the bigger issue of how technologies like this can help all of us. And with that, I'd like to thank you for your attention.